get going.
Right.
So welcome everyone to this meeting of Sustainability Committee of City of Tarpon Springs. It's Thursday, September 16th, 6:02. Call the meeting to order. Can we get a roll call, please?
Chairperson Doria Larson,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Paul Robinson,
Here.
Member Taylor Mandalou,
Here.
Member Denise Menino,
Here.
Member Karen Gallagher,
Here.
Member Robin Singer, Member Carol Mickett,
Present.
All right, thank you. So I feel like it's been like forever since we've been together, just because of like that extra week in there. But good to see everybody. Glad we're all back together working on this. So our first item agenda is the built environment results and a follow-up discussion. So I know that Paul had sent around a memo where he had gotten some feedback. So does everybody have that?
would
Then I'm
me to
gonna-
pull it up?
I'm sorry?
Would you like me to pull it up?
Yeah, that might be good. That might be helpful.
In the meantime, I think that we should do a little celebration that this sustainability manager is actually on the budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. Yeah, yay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that as part of the agenda too. So,
Okay.
yeah, I was wondering, like, should we move it up? But all right. So, Paul, do you want to walk us through this?
Sure. So I'm grateful to the Planning and Zoning Department for getting back to me on this pretty quickly. What I did is I took notes of questions of the committee during the last discussion, and these are the things I captured that we wanted to get feedback from Planning and Zoning. So the question that I gathered from you all is in the regular font there, and then the red font is the answer back from Planning and Zoning, basically the state of the union for the ordinances and such. So the first one had to do with light pollution, and there was questions about what do we already have, and the answer is there's individual references to lighting standards through the Code of Ordinances, but not a designated dark sky policy. There is a section under nuisances that does cite that light as a possible nuisance condition. So that's where we stand now with the ordinances. As far as protection of the neighborhood character, there was discussion about, one of the items was to improve and bring money and resources into blighted areas or et cetera. And the comment from the committee was, well, that could be good, but it also could change the character of the neighborhood and gentrify it. So the answer back to what do we have on that? We do have a compatibility review as a necessary step when changing land use, zoning, or when a particular use requires a conditional use review. However, would not say that this is directed towards preventing gentrification, but rather to ensure there are no negative effects on property owners, which, interpreted to mean a decrease. Okay. The last one is population density. There was questions about what is the appropriate parkland requirement, what is our population density? So Planning and Zoning took a look at the maps and calculated it for us and summed it all up. And the bottom line is, in green, it's hard to read because it's shaded, 1,126 acres, 38 acres per 1,000 population. So I think that exceeds any of the population density suggestions, depending on, no matter what our no matter what our population density is, it exceeds those guidelines for how much parkland per 1,000. So I read this as meaning we're in really good shape right now with this, but this is meant just to provide you information on your questions.
Paul, two questions that popped up. One is, does our population, given our square miles of area, put us in one of those four categories of population density?
Well, what I read this to mean is if you add up what we have Yeah, I don't really have the answer to that question, Paul. I guess what I got out of it is no matter which one we use, we're way above it.
So we're assuming that parkland can include all of the categories you have there.
That's the interpretation of planning and zoning when they reviewed this question.
And that's like usable recreational land, right?
Yeah, parkland in
Okay.
general, yes.
Does privately owned open space, perhaps owned by an HOA, qualify as parkland, as usable space? This is a question that's come up before.
Well, they're including it here, and, you know, we probably each know examples of that in neighborhoods, and, I mean, yeah, whether it's private or public, it serves a purpose.
Well, I have to say that, you know, we have this little park on Chesapeake. But it's really not maintained, and it's always got, you know, really high grass and sand. You know, it's a piece of land. They were out there because there's a drainage there, and they were out, city was out there the other day to fix it, but they haven't been back. I heard them say, do you want to do it now or do you want to come back? And they all said, come back. But, I mean, it could be this beautiful place where the neighborhood could use it, but it's really, you know, it's only used really by dogs. And so I wonder, there may be the land, but is it being maintained so it enhances the neighborhoods, except the big parks that we have? So I think in terms of sustainability, that's important.
Is it strictly just land? Is there a picnic table? Is there anything on that?
There's a bench.
And it's city-owned?
Oh, yeah.
So that's, what should have been included in this
Yeah.
number, I would think?
Oh, it's small. It's really small.
Yeah, I do remember Pat McNeese
Right.
presenting to us maybe a year ago, and that question was asked.
I
and-
asked it.
Yeah, she said the really small stuff really isn't included in that granular type stuff that, in their overall map. So
But
that-
it impacts the neighborhood.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there's many of them that, I don't think this is the only one that isn't normally maintained. So,
Well, I think what's important about parkland too is what it's not. It's not developed land. So that makes room for critters, space for people to be, have some elbow room. So, you know, whether or not it's maintained for public typical uses of running around and playing baseball, you know, may not be the only criterion.
right,
for,
but I just mean like the grass is cut and the trees are, you know, not falling apart.
Yeah, I'd
That seems
almost
pretty
value,
basic maintenance.
on, you know, land that is more in its wild state. You know, I think that that's really beneficial to all of us beings. You know, and I think that that's really important. To HOA properties, I don't see how that could be counted. I mean, it does allow for the people that are part of the HOA to have the open space. But it's not as though, I know my daughter lives in an HOA just right across Klosterman, and they watch it like a hawk. If you're not really there for some resident, there's no way that you could be there. You know, just even in the neighborhood, and there's some open spaces there, but you have to, you know, prove that you're there for a resident.
I think that we need to have, I mean, for me personally, like, I take an issue with the landfill, because that's not a park. Like, that's, and there's no trees on it because we're dumping stuff on it, so I don't see how we consider that part of the numbers. And I think to everybody's point, we need to tighten up what we consider park versus preservation, and really, when we're looking at this, have a better understanding of what's fully public access that you know, anybody can walk on and not get a trespass notice versus an HOA where they can trespass you because it's private property. To me, there needs to be a clearer distinction when we're calculating how much, what our levels of service are for park space, but then also back to natural services for open area.
I think it also has to do with if you're in, like this little park surrounded by homes. I mean, it's a residential, it's not someplace that's supposed to be wild. And I think it's important to distinguish between the space that is wild for animals, where it's appropriate for them to be, and then places that are in neighborhoods where it probably isn't.
Yeah, so, I mean, that would be my thought, is that we would want to try to get more buckets, I guess, to really wrap our head around what we really have. Because if we want to look at the urban tree canopy, we can't really be putting trees on
A landfill with
a
a liner.
landfill,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we can't do that.
And trees have to be maintained. I mean, it's important for trees.
All right, so just to kind of make sure that I'm set with what we've got, we did keep local action 2 to adopt a light policy. So we'll keep that in there because it sounds like we don't have a light policy. And if that's something that we want to explore, we need to keep that in.
Right.
And then action 11 was under infill and redevelopment. And I think that we tweaked that action item to include protects the character of the neighborhood. But I think that it might be good to at least elevate this. I don't know if it to the Board of Commissioners or who, but like it says no negative effects of the property values, which is generally interpreted to mean a decrease. Somebody may not want that if it's, if it's going to drive their property values up to the point that they can't stay in their home. So,
Yeah, that's the danger when we're talking about gentrification, is just making a neighborhood unavailable to the people that have historically lived there.
or maybe that's part of the code updates that they're doing right now.
Or needs to be.
Well, I mean, they're doing the code updates right now, so maybe that's something that we put in our list of recommendations, that we tweak that language to specifically call out gentrification. And then for the population density, again, I think that we need to tweak the categories so that we're all understanding exactly what properties we have. Okay, any other questions or thoughts about?
Well, the landfill could become parkland, but
Not if it's an active landfill, right?
you're right, not if it's an active landfill.
Well, it's not an active, it's a closed landfill, but the reason it's left wide open like that is there is a liner over the top of it that needs to maintain its integrity to keep the groundwater out. So it does have to stay intact and probably look very much like it does now, just a grassy, open area.
Is there a timeline on that? I know that, there's
That's a good question.
timelines on the liners, actually, whether they're permeable or not, but I'm just wondering if there's a timeline on when that land can be utilized in some way. I mean, when it's not considered hazardous anymore.
Right.
I don't know enough to really know.
Was it yard waste or was it a landfill before we
I
had
think it
the
was in the
waste re-
70s, it was a landfill.
Okay, so God knows what's in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
paint cans, pet food.
I don't think there's a
everything.
current determination on how much longer it needs to be maintained like it is.
At least it's covered in grass and not concrete. So that's something.
All right, any other questions or comments about the built environment results? All right, then moving on to equity and empowerment. So we all actually just handed out the blue sheets, so can we just look off of that instead of having her pull that back up? All right. So the first, get it pulled up. All right, the first, let's go through outcomes first, and then we'll do local action. So equity and empowerment, 1, civic engagement, there was a 4 vote for 3A, outcome 3A. So that is demonstrate that appointments to local advisory boards and commissions reflect the gender, racial, and ethnic diversity of the community. So we'll keep that one in.
That's crucial.
I have problems with that. And I think we should use this committee just as a way to look at that option. There are 2 men on this committee. So we're not maintaining gender diversity appropriate to this community on this committee.
Do you know what that division is?
I'm sorry?
Are there equal men and women?
It's about 50-50.
Oh, I would
Yeah.
have thought there were more women, but.
That's, that's one example. Why are there only 2 men on this committee? How come there's so many women on this committee?
How
Well,
come there's no people of color on this?
Right.
how many Greeks are there in this committee if we're talking about ethnic diversity?
Half. 0.5, I'm a 0.5.
One
I'm
person?
half also.
Okay, look, we made up one.
Okay. I married a Greek, but it's the best I could do with what I was handed, but that's not the same. If we say that appointments to local advisory boards and commissions reflect the diversity of the community, we're kind of missing the point that it took months for there to be sufficient number of people to apply to be on this committee, for the Board of Commissioners to be able to pick enough people to have a committee. And frankly, I would rather that this committee be entirely composed of women, if the women are interested in the topic and involved in the topic, than forcing the issue or telling the board that they have to force the issue just for the sake of diversity.
Well-
It kind of misses the point of how things actually work.
I completely disagree. And, there's, one of the things about having diversity is being welcomed to be involved. And people aren't welcomed. If you're in the African-American community in this city, they do not feel welcome. They don't even feel welcome going down to the docks or downtown. And that's been reported. So for me, being on this committee, I applied to be on it because someone reached out to me to say, do you want to be on this? And I wouldn't have applied otherwise. I wouldn't even really know to apply. And I think that just because it says reflects the diversity doesn't mean it has to be the exact percentage. We have a commission that's, a white man. That is unbelievable to me in the 21st century, that in this community there aren't women, and there are women who are completely qualified, and I hope this time around things get changed. But we don't have any people of color running. And I think that it behooves the city to do whatever it can to engage that diversity. We need different voices. There are tons of people who are qualified to do this.
Then why did none of them apply?
Well, because I think to Carol's point, it's really a lot of word of mouth instead of reaching into the community and making sure that people know about opportunities. And so if you look at Local Action 5, which we'll get to, but it's partnering with civic organizations and neighborhood organizations to increase and promote community engagement. So to me,
Exactly.
that we could always be improving in doing that. And I think that it's really important that we do that.
I agree with you. I have another problem with this whole thing, though, and that's that I suspect that Robin Sanger could provide us with a lot of information about this whole section, and I feel myself a little bit at sea here because I don't have the knowledge base that I suspect she has about what is available, what barriers there are to different groups, or what presumed or perceived barriers there are at different groups. I'm not sure that I have the knowledge base to have an opinion about this. And I'm not sure that we shouldn't postpone this until we can hear at least from her and perhaps from others representing city government and county government. Our
Well-
previous mayor was African-American. He's very effective. He's a good guy. He's very involved in his community. But that did not translate into other members of the African-American community becoming involved.
It did
Why?
not.
I don't know the answer.
Well, I am very involved in this issue. I sit on the board of the Pinellas County Urban League. I am part of the steering committee for North Pinellas Advocacy for Racial Equity. I work on this issue. I communicate with David Archie a lot. We sit on the Pinellas County Community Foundation together. I communicate with him about this issue. It's a big issue, and part of it is reaching out. And I know Robin has reached out, and that part of it is reaching out to people and mentoring them about how to be part of this. People have to feel welcomed, and they have to feel like they aren't, aliens.
Then I think we're agreeing completely. I think reaching out to people and explaining the issues and encouraging their involvement is a very, as Dory, I think, was pointing out, is a very different thing than demonstrating that diversity exists, or by golly, it better exist.
Well, I think it's a goal that we're looking to hit, so
Yeah.
I think that we keep it in as a goal. Like, why wouldn't we want to keep a goal of having a diverse board?
Yeah.
Then I think you would word it slightly differently.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be something to the effect that we're going to cultivate or generate, actively or proactively generate diversity. But through mentoring, I mean, we could put that into the wording.
Well, but that's the action that you take, and that's one of the local actions that we did select.
Okay.
So I feel like we keep the goal, and
I
then
do
we
too.
support it with the local actions.
That's a great point. This is an outcome. Yeah, remember, that's what the desired endpoint is.
Thank you, yeah, forget that.
So I'd like to go ahead and put a pin on this and keep moving with it, because
And one of the things that has to happen to have diversity, is that people like us have to step down and not always be the ones on the committees. And that is something that I've learned being part of these other groups and working for diversity and equity in Pinellas County, is that one needs to make space for that diversity.
Yep. So, and I also want to point out just one more thing, and then I do want to keep moving, is that this is our first pass at it. So, I mean, like, we obviously come to this with our own, like, bias, and it's going to go to the community before any of this gets implemented as part of community outreach and engagement to seek community input on these goals. So my hope is that we get a lot of feedback on this segment from the community on what they want to see. And it may not jive with what we have here. They may want to do outcome 2 or some different outcome. And I think that that's all part of it, is
And we're gonna
getting
have
feedback
to
from staff
bring
and
this
getting feedback from the
to-
community.
Bring this to different communities.
Correct.
We can't expect people to come to us.
And we're going to get to that conversation later in the evening. So, okay,
Sorry, can I just make a quick comment to Paul's point? Is, I think it's the wording of that needs to be, for the goal, I don't know how to word it, but I would be very cautionary on wording that, because you don't want to put people in a role, strictly for putting people in a role, who either are not qualified or don't want to be there. And so, as far as putting people whether it's on a commission or a committee or something like that, I think you are looking for people who are qualified or actually have an vested interest as opposed to just shooting for a target. So I don't know if it's a wording thing, I just think, obviously we want as much diversity as we can have, because I think you get a lot of different input from different communities in ours, because we're a pocket of different communities, But I think putting somebody on there just for the sake of checking off a box and saying, yep, we hit that target, I think we have to be really careful about that as well.
There
I
are
don't think
lots of
anyone who would
examples.
want to do that.
No, I don't either. I think though, if we're looking specifically at, here's our goal, here's our goal, here's our goal, and we're just not really looking at the scheme of that and saying, our goal is to have, 50% women and 50% men, and we're, I'm just using that as the example you put out there, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm just using it.
Precisely.
So if we're just strictly going by, we're trying to demonstrate this, that we are diverse in that we have, we represent our community, we may be missing out on very qualified people. So I'm not, I absolutely would love to have every aspect of the community represented and in fair numbers. I think we just have to be careful how we word a goal towards that. That's my.
Well, I think that everyone will find that there are a lot of qualified people out there. I mean, this is what happened in St. Pete, and having been, see the evolution of that, there's no lack of qualified people in all of the groups.
I don't
around.
think anybody's questioning
No,
that.
I agree with you completely.
I agree with you
think
too.
the wording of it needs to be.
I think we've had lots of examples in which our outcome, preferred outcome would be demonstrate an increase or demonstrate an improvement or demonstrate, la-di-da, change over time, which to me is more palatable than the way that's written.
Well, B is demonstrate incremental progress in appointing local advisory boards. So, I mean, I'm fine with selecting option B instead of option A.
Me too.
Me three.
And
Do we have
incremental
consensus?
could be
Are you
big
guys okay with
jumps.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna change it on my notes to 3B.
Okay.
All right, next one. Civil and human rights. 1, Part 2 was selected.
We're looking still at outcomes,
We're
correct?
just looking at outcomes across the top,
Okay.
yep. So, 1, Part 2 got 4 votes.
I see.
But the issue is, it's an and statement for the outcome. I mean, we can break it apart. I think we can do whatever we want. The part 2 is demonstrate that all non-police related civil and human rights complaints in the past 3 years have been investigated and violations redressed in a timely manner.
Why would we want to involve this particular area of one part of our civil service population? I mean, has it been demonstrated that civil and human rights complaints have not been followed up, or that there are violations that have not been addressed or redressed?
I don't think we know. I think that that's why you check to demonstrate that they have been investigated.
Why,
If they have been, then we could just move on like we have with all the others.
this, I find this a little presumptuous. It presumes, well, if I were a cop and I read this, to me, that presumes that they are not doing their jobs.
Who?
The second one's non-police related.
Did we pick both? Part 1 and 2?
Part 1, Part 2.
Yes. Demonstrate that all non-police related civil and human rights complaints have been investigated and violations redressed in a timely manner. Do we have evidence that, and what are non-police related civil and human rights complaints? What do those constitute? Do we have evidence that they are not being addressed? I don't understand why we would go into this area.
Well, I think that we know that in our communities, I don't think Tarpon Springs much different than the rest of the country, that there have been lots of human rights violations that have not been addressed. It's part of the reason why there's a real examination of those at this time. And it seems that it would behoove Tarpon Springs to address number 2, in the hope that, to find out that they all have been addressed, and that there's been, I hate to say that I suspect that a number of them haven't, because we are human and we're part of this culture, and I think that it's a good thing to have this sort of a framework to work from, and I think that
you are
this is
showing a
appropriate.
bias that is based upon what has transpired in large cities in other parts of the country and may have absolutely nothing to do with Tarpon Springs. And that, I find the bias insulting, frankly. Let's say we were not talking about police, let's say we were talking about some other profession. The way in which this is worded, to me, is inappropriate and presumes that they're not doing their jobs. Based upon what? No evidence whatsoever. I have a little bit of bias of my own. I'm a trauma doc. And that means that for 4 decades, I worked hand in gloves with police, both within my hospitals, there were 3 of them, 3 trauma centers, and in the community, in the ditch, in the street, in the middle of the night, at 3 a.m. They have a lot of people looking over their shoulders all the time. And they have a lot of rules and regulations that they have to live up to. And it's a tough job. And just because Milwaukee and New York City and other places have had issues with civil and human rights complaints and problems doesn't mean that we do here. And I don't like the way this is worded.
Well,
And
how
I
would you
don't
like
know
it
that
to
I
be
think
worded?
this committee has any business involving itself. And as I look at the resolution that created our committee, I don't think this is what the Board of Commissioners has asked us to do. I think it's way out of line.
So I'd like to make a quick point, depending on what the resolution says, but if you change the wording a little bit, I don't know if there are complaints, but if there aren't, then I don't see a problem with it being precautionary, just to kind of be like, if this does happen in the future, then we have a thing in our books to kind of take a look at it, make sure we're treating it right. But depending on what the resolution says, how many complaints we have, I don't know.
It's been a systemic problem in our culture that I think that we need to acknowledge and demonstrate that we have thoughts and guidance in place to help prevent disenfranchisement of any groups or I just don't, I don't think that we can completely blot it out. It has to be part of equity.
Sustainability isn't all about the environment. If your people are up in arms with pitchforks and torches, then that's not sustainable.
It would also create an atmosphere, because we do know that people are often reluctant to bring up a rights violation. And it would create an atmosphere in the city where people may feel more comfortable, acknowledging that their rights have been violated.
you know, the same kind of bias and prejudice and arrogance that led to the outcome number one also says things like provide training for police officers focused on implicit bias, cultural responsiveness, and non-discrimination. 7, modify law enforcement operations to increase transparency. The people who wrote this are demonstrating their own prejudice and their own bias. By definition.
Why?
Yes,
It's not
they
by
are.
definition.
Provide training for police officers focused on implicit bias.
You know,
Law enforcement
I-
operations to increase transparency. Hey,
Where are you reading from right now?
I'm reading from the actions.
Okay, so we're not there yet. We're
We're
on,
not there yet, and you didn't hear what I said. What I said was the same kind of bias and arrogance that led to the outcomes also led to the wording of these actions. There's a
Okay.
demonstration of prejudice, bias, and I think arrogance throughout this whole thing, and I don't like it.
I think we hear you, and I think that the majority does not agree.
Then I think we should vote on it.
Well, we did vote on it. We have 4 people that voted for it.
Before a discussion.
You know, before, since we didn't even talk about, you know, it didn't show up on the list, the voter issues, you know, that were part of the wording, and that was outcome 1 and outcome 2. Just as part of the research that I was doing prior to this, just looking at that and thinking, how do you demonstrate that there's a voter turnout that is representative of the community, right? I was looking at AmericanProgress.org and just reading their document on it, and I know we're not talking about voting, I just started seeing that within our structure and the whole culture in this country, sadly, you know, they were talking about the United States being having systematic disenfranchisement of particular groups, especially African American, and its legacy continued in the wake of 2013 U.S. Supreme Court decisions. And I was reading about the Supreme Court decisions, and I know we're not talking about voting, but when I look at this and I think, oh my gosh, right within the Supreme Court, there's this Shelby County versus Holder that allows all states, including those with a history of white supremacy and voter suppression, to manipulate voting procedures without federal oversight. And then there was a more recent decision in 2018. It gives me the sense that there's an incredible problem
There is an
within our
incredible problem,
country.
but you're
And I'm not
you're
saying that you
projecting
blame our
from something at a
people
national
for.
level to a local level.
No, it's just putting preventative measures in place to address. What if we hire people from other communities that have serious issues?
Not
You
one
know, in the
person,
future.
not one person has answered the very first question that I asked. Nobody went near it, which is, what evidence do we have that we need this kind of involvement? And what evidence do we have that these things?
I'd say the
What
evidence
evidence
is
do you
that we
have that
live
we don't
in,
need
we
it?
live in
Even
the
need-
United States.
You don't do something like this. You start with a study to look at the community and see if a problem exists. You don't superimpose what's going on nationally or in the media upon a city of 25,000. Or upon a police force which is widely respected in the community.
Would we be able to get any complaints that we do have had in the past 3 years, just to see if there's any? I mean, not this second, obviously, but do we know? And also, what evidence do you have that we don't need it?
And where would
That's a
people
negative,
make the
that's a double
complaint?
negative. No, you don't go there. You answer the first question is, show a preponderance of evidence that these things are happening.
I don't have the
Consistently.
evidence,
No,
but
and nobody, we don't have it. So what do? You do a study to find out if there's reason to go there.
I'm gonna take this, like, what about, like, like an issue that we know is in our community, but we just don't see it, like domestic violence. We know it's in our community. But we don't see it, and we don't talk about it, and we know it's there. So if there was a way to try to demonstrate that those complaints are getting fleshed out and being resolved and like being evaluated, why would we not want to do that?
Yeah.
Then we need information from the people in charge in this city.
Why would we want, why
Who's
would
in
we, why do
charge?
we need permission to make sure that that complaints are being investigated?
I mean, one of the things is where are people going to make these complaints? I mean, we know that the African community in Tarpon keeps itself segregated. I mean, you go downtown, Tarpon, you go to the docks, you never see black people, ever. You know, if I see a black person when we're driving through the docks, and we do it a lot because Robert likes to go down there, drive through, it's like, oh, look, a black person. It's like a big deal. Our community is not welcoming. I've had African American people come here, go to Home Depot, and be told they're not welcome in Tarpon. I mean, we have these issues here. I mean, they weren't going to report it. They reported it to me, and they were just buying stuff at Home Depot, and these people wanted to run them out of town.
Is there no documentation of these complaints anywhere?
I don't know. I mean, he wasn't going to complain. Why? I mean, it's just like why women don't report that they're raped, because the consequences of it are huge. And you're not going to certainly go to an all-male, white male commission. I wouldn't. I mean,
So how do we get the data? How do we get information that we can act on that will be long-lasting?
we have to create a community and a vehicle. It is one of the great things of Peace for Tarpon, is to create place where people feel safe. And one of the things is that we do need the police to be on board with us. And the city needs to coordinate that. We want to create a safe space. I mean, I think we can all agree about that. And for many people in this community, however wonderful Tarpon is, it's not that space. And that's why this equity empowerment is a crucial part of sustainability. It's human infrastructure that we need to sustain.
Action one in that, it does talk about collecting and analyzing and publishing data on racial and ethnic disparities, and I think that will be addressed, and I think it's healthy to have the verbiage out there, to express that this is what we're intending in order to make the community feel safe for everyone who lives here. And
Again,
whether or not we have had a problem yet, or we've had problems that have been unreported, we will be collecting and analyzing and publishing the data on
Yeah,
the issue.
I think Denise, you and Carol just touched on a very important thing. If these things are not being reported, how do we approach this? We can't demonstrate it if it's not being reported. If members of minority communities in Tarpon don't report the things because they think it won't do any good, how do you approach it?
Well, as Paul said, those are goals. Those are goals that come as we do our action. So we may, when we first look, say, well, look, people aren't reporting. So then we try to create situations where people feel comfortable. We look at why aren't people feeling comfortable? What sorts of things have happened? And basically, we have to create trust within the community.
Then it sounds like what you're in favor of is action number 4.
Right, but you need a goal.
We haven't gotten to the actions yet.
Right, so I guess, think if we go back to is there a goal in this? Like, do you want a goal? Do you just want local actions? Because you're right, I think if you do look down at the actions, which I know we're not at, those are, your actions are exactly, to me, what you're demonstrating or discussing is, how do we even know that this is happening? Well, you can, you go out in the community and you find out if these things are happening. You create an environment where people are willing to discuss this and report this, et cetera, if they're not already doing that. So I think we go back to the statement from, even the last one is that demonstrate that all of this is happening is a goal. So that at the end of all of this, you can look at this and say, we have, because of all these actions that we've taken, we can actually demonstrate that things are being followed up on. And, there's all these complaints are being taken care of. So all it is a very broad, general goal, where the meat and potatoes is in our local actions to help us demonstrate those things actually happening. That's how I interpret it.
Me too. That was a nice.
One thing I could do to possibly help is ask our Chief of Police, Jeff Young, to take a look at the 3 that you all are, at least by vote, most interested in, and that would be, it looks to me like it's the part 2 of outcome 1 has got the 4-vote threshold, right, which is not the police one, but I could ask him to look at part 1 anyway and give us some information, sort of like we've done with the planning and zoning response. Now, that would be after this meeting's over, but, and also ask him to talk to me about actions 6 and 7 that you all have highlighted as well. He may provide answers back that actually make us feel pretty good about where we are, and that we also feel good about keeping these in as goals and outcomes. I just don't have enough information to tell you that right now.
Yeah, I'd like to hear his response. He is a very well-respected police chief, but I don't understand why you would vote in favor of 6 and 7 and not in action 4. I just don't understand.
Well, we haven't gotten to
We
that.
haven't,
It's
yeah, we
strictly-
haven't gotten there yet, but I also want to say that, like, to me, part of, like, when I was a teacher, if we had to report if a child, if we suspected child abuse, and then the state checks up on that and verifies, if there wasn't a process in place, I would feel like a total jerk as a teacher, as a person empowered to make a change, that things weren't getting followed up on. So I would never feel like somebody was looking over my shoulder with that. I would feel like there's a process in place to make sure that if a complaint is made, that it's being addressed. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that.
Well, and I was going to say, I suspect that this is also going to have a state component to it, much like some of our other things we look at that actually end up are county responsibilities or state responsibilities. I think we're going to find that a lot of these things are already going on and it's part of an existing process. And all we're really doing is just making sure it's there, the process, that is. We're not presuming any sort of guilt. Just making sure there's a system in place, really.
A local system where we hope.
Or that the
people-
local system utilizes the larger
Yeah.
system. You know.
Because the local systems are where people know one another and can, and people feel more comfortable.
Okay, so I want to move on to environmental justice. We're going to go ahead, I mean, if you want to, if we want to take a vote, we can take a vote right now to, and the vote would be keeping in part 2 of outcome 1.
Part 2, what do you mean?
Outcome.
Outcome 1, part 2
Outcome 1,
only?
part 2.
Yeah, the one
That's
we've
what,
been
that's what we,
talking
that's what the
about.
4 is for.
Doria, for
Okay.
this item, would you like to work vertically on this, since we're already discussing this whole objective? Do you want to go down and just finish up the
Well, then we'd have
actions
to go
as-
back and do
Back to
civic
the
and,
first,
yeah,
so
I'd
we
rather
haven't-
not. I'd rather just continue.
I'd rather put this on the table until let's hear from the police chief and frankly are better educated as to what processes are already in place.
What? I'd like to go ahead and take a vote, because I feel like whether or not the police get back to us about whether they have something in place or not, it's coming from this committee. So voting on keeping in part 2, demonstrate that all non-police civil and human rights complaints in the past 3 years have been investigated and violations are redressed in a timely manner. Taylor?
Second,
No, I mean,
we're voting.
yeah,
Okay.
we're just going to go ahead and vote. We don't need a motion.
Aye.
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 No.
Yes.
Okay. Environmental justice.
I'd
Out-
like to say one thing to Paul. If you could find out what agencies or anything are in the city currently that address this, that would be helpful too.
I would also like to say, I mean, it's not written in stone. If we find that going down the road that we either don't need that or need to modify that in some way, shape, or form, we're able to, if we omit it completely right now, we're never going to address that again, and that could be a very, very big default on our part. We would be remiss in not exploring that. So my vote for keeping it in strictly is, it's a bookmark to me that as we learn information and flush out the meat and potatoes, that's there to go back in and rehash.
Thank you.
I have to say that I spoke to the city manager about some of these issues, and he said, he talked about to me the sustainability committee, and he said, it's important that the sustainability committee doesn't just focus on the environment, that they focus on the community and human interaction, and that what we're doing now is an important part of sustainability. I mean, whether that's here nor there, I just thought I'd throw that out.
If I
I'm glad
could,
he
point of
thinks
order
that.
too, I
The
just wanted to make,
problem is that if you bite off too big a chunk, sometimes you don't finish anything.
Okay?
There's the old story of the guy who landed on a desert island and realized that he needed shelter.
Mhm.
And as he was chopping down a tree using a sharpened stone, he got hungry. So he tried to catch a fish. Then he realized he needed to start a fire to cook the fish. When they found him a month later as a skeleton, he hadn't accomplished a single thing. The environmental issues that threaten this community are huge. If we try to go off in too many directions, we won't finish them either.
Okay, well,
And if we look back at the resolution that created this committee, there's not a word about police. And there's not a word about a lot of the other things that are in this, what we're using as an outline.
It charges us to come up with a sustainability action plan, and sustainability is more than the climate change and the environment. It
I
is
agree-
also
I
equity,
agree
empowerment,
completely.
and
But
injustices.
if you look simply at what we're facing from the standpoint of flooding and heat, we don't even have to look at air pollution, we don't have to look at red tide, we don't have to look at flesh-eating bacteria, Vibrio in the water that's getting warmer. If you just look at those two issues, those impact the health, the public health, the economics, the existence of Tarpon Springs. The tax base of Tarpon Springs is threatened to the tune of 40 to 60% within 25 years. If we spend all of our time being diverse and don't focus on what will make this community unlivable, which is environmental right now, which is climate change, we may not accomplish anything soon enough.
We did address this at the beginning, that we're not like a climate change committee or what have you, but that we were looking at sustainability. So I think that these things become important because it is what we were tasked to do, is sustainability, and it needs to be sustainable.
And I agreed with you then, but I think we're getting very far off the mark.
well, that's good to know. Thank you for saying what you have to say. It was very clear.
I just wanted to say, when you're taking votes, we have 5 votes. I think we've got 6 people here. So is Dr. Mickett, are you the alternate tonight?
Yes.
Okay, so
Okay.
just want to make sure the numbers
So
add
the
up.
vote went 5-4-1.
Yes.
Thank you. Good point. All right,
I
environmental
spoke
justice.
quietly.
Outcome 1 is demonstrate progress in reducing the risk and exposure of priority environmental justice conditions for priority neighborhoods. Moving on, equitable services and access is the next topic, and the outcome is demonstrate increased access and proximity to community facilities, services, and infrastructure in neighborhoods with the highest percentage of low-income residents and people of color. And that's in with 5 votes. The next one is human services.
Fast.
So
Oh,
EE5.
got it.
Outcome 1 was selected by 4 votes and 2A. So outcome 1 is homelessness services, demonstrate the homeless population within the community receives timely housing services or resources. And then 2A is mental health and substance abuse services. Option A, demonstrate the timely provision of mental health and substance abuse treatment programs and services. And then the last section, poverty prevention and alleviation, we did not come to consensus on an outcome. All right, so now let's go back to civic engagement. Looking at the local actions, local action 5 received 6 votes. So local action 5 is partner with businesses, civic, nonprofit, and neighborhood organizations to increase and promote community engagement and local decision-making. Any conversations about that? The second item is local action 9, which actually, the first one received 6 votes. I think I misspoke. Local action 9 received 5 votes. Local action 9 is provide civic education programs that support the development of positive, strong youth leaders with a particular focus on engaging individuals from low-income and/or minority neighborhoods. And then local action 8 is provide young people with opportunities to participate in civic activities. That got 4 votes.
That's great, because that's how we create leaders for the future. And create the diversity that we're looking for.
And my thought is maybe even like Cops for Kids program or like a program that's already existing. You could like tap into those things that are already there instead of trying to like recreate the wheel.
And also, we have, what is it called? The thing I did, Robert and I did with the city, where you go around and you,
Citizen Academy?
yeah. So you create that for young people. You have a Young People Citizen Academy.
Oh,
I
that'd be
know
fun.
St. Pete's doing that now, and I'm sure other cities are too, but I thought Citizen Academy was fabulous. And I think for young people, that would be, geared to young people would be really good.
Future leadership.
For
For
leadership.
future leadership.
Yeah, right.
They do that at the county level. They do the youth leadership
Yeah.
analysis for high school students
It'd be
and,
good to do
Andrew
it
did that.
here.
yeah. and so they
Especially
get 'em
when they
in.
give you free food.
So I will make a comment, actually, if you've got a quick second. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm a member of the Tarpon Springs Rotary Club, and we did a program where we took local kids to Caladesi Island. And so there were a handful of people who had boats and a handful of the Rotarians. So it was all, and what we did is we coordinated with Cops for Kids, the Citizens Alliance for Progress, and the Boys and Girls Clubs. And they all had their permission slips and what have you. And we took them out for an entire day out to Caladesi Island. And some of these kids came out and said, and these are all kids local to our community, and some said, I have never been to the beach before. And we talked about 46 miles of waterfront, water, what have you, and their children in our community who have never been to the beach before. Never, and so there are ways to engage the civic organizations within our community. They've just now done it, a North Pinellas Civics organization type of thing where, you're getting all of the civic organizations from North Pinellas together to help each other work on different projects within the community, so that you're not all just, this is my project and nobody else can help me with this, what have you. So I think it's important, as we talk about this, is to, have an idea of how to get all of the different organizations in there to reach out to those different communities. Because, again, these are the kids who know nothing about our community, that we want to lead our community. So, just my,
And that's the,
like a
that's the kind of
wonderful
thing that
program.
inspires them about the environment too. I mean, it's a tremendous awakening for someone who's never been there. And all of a sudden, they start to understand their connection to the natural environment.
and it was eye-opening to me, because I just, I mean, my kids grew up in the water, and so I just didn't, until somebody said, I've never, they went home with with seashells, and that was a highlight, was never been to the beach before. So there are opportunities. We just need to understand how to connect with the environments and the organizations we already have here working in the community.
Paul, do you have any idea of outreach by the city currently in any of these areas that would overlap with actions 5, 8, and 9?
I'm reading what 5, 8, and 9 are, just to be able to answer your question, but looks like young people mainly, but also not, well, mainly the youth.
And then businesses and civics and nonprofits.
Okay. I think some of our latest moves in the apps we're using to reach out to the public is going to go a long way to reaching a broader audience, including young people. So we're using this app that Planning and Zoning reviewed with you to connect us as part of the strategic plan, comp plan work we're doing. That's going to tie in later to item 4, but short answer is yes. We're continuing to evolve our communication methods, going way beyond the put a note in the water bills or put a media post out. I don't think either one of those really get to the youth. But I think once we start putting this in the forefront, we'll get creative with ways to do that. Schools would be a great way to reach through, but that's historically been a challenge. The schools are very selective about what information they let the city post. I guess understandably, they don't want to be burdened with tons of things, but
These 3 actions sound to me like the very best way to develop the leaders for the next generation.
All right, moving on to EE2, Civil and Human Rights. So local action 9 received 5 votes, and that is provide language translation or interpretation services to ensure residents have access to information about their civil and human rights and local government services. And then local action 6 and 7 also got 4 votes. So local action 6 is provide training for police officers focused on implicit bias, cultural responsiveness, and non-discrimination. And then action 7 is modify law enforcement operations to increase transparency and accountability in interactions between community members and law enforcement. And I think I would like to get from Officer Young, or from Chief Young now, because I suspect that they're already doing 6 and 7, quite honestly. But it would be nice to get a report back, because I also, I think there was discussion about them getting body camera for as part of their equipment, and I'm not sure if that happened or didn't happen, so that would be good to know as well.
I think we should put 6 and 7 on hold. I have no problem with 9, but I think that the wording of 6 and 7 implies bias by the people who wrote it.
Providing training, how does that imply bias?
Provide training for police officers focused on implicit bias, cultural responsiveness, and non-discrimination. First of all, it's probably already being done. It's probably redundant. But secondly, it presupposes that they have bias.
Well,
Everybody has bias.
I see that
We
it's
all have
proactive.
bias.
It's
but
just
I mean-
proactive, putting it in writing.
I
And
think we
I
should
think
wait
that it
until, I
needs to be
think
in
we should
writing.
wait until we hear from him, I really do.
I think
And if
he'd
he doesn't,
probably
if he's
agree.
not offended by this, then fine.
With all due respect, I don't care if he's offended.
Yes,
I mean,
it's about-
it's about the right thing to do. As a teacher, I taught at a Title I school. We had to learn cultural competency for low-income kids.
Yeah.
The way that they talk, the way that they, the way that they respond to adults. Like, as an adult who's interacting with those kids, I have to be aware of and respond to that. So there's nothing wrong with people being trained on how to be appropriate.
Yeah.
I think they are being trained. I think it's, first of all, we don't know what their training involves. It may be a great deal more than what any of us in this room are aware of.
Well, then it's being met.
So,
I mean,
okay, yeah, I'm not gonna be redundant. I don't understand how you can vote for 6 and 7 and not for 4. It doesn't make sense to me.
what's for?
Conduct local public education campaigns regarding civil and human rights, such as the process for filing complaints.
So are you
Okay.
saying that you want to add 4 in?
I voted for that.
I would
so did
substitute
I.
for, if the problem is that people are afraid or don't know how to file complaints, or don't file complaints, that will give us information.
Well, I also feel like I am a white middle-class woman who's never had to file a civil rights complaint. So I don't even know how much of it's happening in our community, nor I don't think anyone in this room. And I think that getting citizen input from this and getting, like, to me, that's what I'm gonna care more about, is what pockets of our community think and want in this plan than what I want in this plan. So,
Great.
right,
So you're agreeing with me?
no, I'm agreeing that I want to keep it in for now, as this is what we're saying, but then I definitely want to hear what other folks have to say and value that higher a premium, at least from my perspective, because I am admitting I don't know.
I would like to see action 4 put in strictly because if you don't know that there is a process to file a complaint or how to do it or how to go about doing it without retribution, you're not going to do it, as we said before. So I personally, I did vote for number 4. It was not included as one of the priority ones, but I do think if people don't know how to file or are afraid of it because of retribution, then we need to address that.
Well, let's
Sounds
bump
good.
it up.
okay with that?
Yes.
Denise, you okay
I
with
am
that?
okay with that.
I'm okay with that,
Let's bump
Paul?
it up.
Yep.
Okay, then I'm adding 4. To the
About
mix.
the police, I think, Paul, you have a really good relationship with the police. I've often felt like I never see them. I mean, I've had someone come to my house when my Biden things kept being stolen out of my yard to report theft, but I never see them. I feel a little leery about them. And I would like to see, and I've said this to many people, I would like to see the police more visible in our community. Walking the streets, being on the beat, being more interactive with community. And I think that if that were the case, a lot of these issues could be addressed. So I think that the police can always be better and more involved in the community, because even though there's cops and kids and they do all this stuff, the police hold a particular place in a community, and they hold a particular place of power. And because they have that power, normal folk like me are like, whoa. And we know that power can get out of hand. So one of the things that's important is that the community has a good relationship with the police, and a sort of informal relationship in some way, so that we feel very comfortable with the police. And I think that some people have that relationship, but I think the majority of people in the city do not.
I've had police officers of this city who were my patients, and I've had others that I've dealt with in a variety of situations. Most recently, when we removed a tree adjacent to my mother-in-law's house and had to block Tarpon Avenue for most of a Saturday. There was one black and one white police officer, and we spent most of the day chatting with each other. It has been my experience in this community, and in others as well, but specifically here, that I find the police to be professional, human, funny, appropriate, and I'm a little troubled by superimposing national preconceived ideas, whatever merit they have, upon this police force with the presumption that something isn't going right. I think that it is very common for police officers to feel very strongly about getting to the bottom of problems and being frustrated by not being able to get information from members of the community. And that's not me talking, that's lots of cops that I've worked with all day long and all night long, you know, and we see the same purulent underbelly of society, they and I. If you're right, and the real problem is people don't know how to file complaints, or they feel that they will be ignored, then that's the problem.
Well, I think that you and I are in agreement. I think that one of the things that you've exhibited is that your relationship, your interactions, your personal contact with the police has made you very comfortable with them. And I think what we want is more people to have that sort of relationship. But like I said, I certainly don't, and I don't know how to have that relationship with them. And I think that that's one of the things that this can address, is how to make it so that people have, and the police have a back and forth trust with one another and feel comfortable. And that, I think, is what you're saying would benefit us as a community and would benefit the police.
Then I think you have to be very careful about how you word this, that a group of public servants who put their lives on the line every day are not offended by the way in which we write things.
I don't, again, though, as a professional educator, which is similar, like in my experience, very similar to law enforcement in the way that you're interacting with the public as a figure of authority, there's no reason why I would not want more training or more transparency in my interactions with parents and with students.
What if this said provide training for teachers focused on implicit bias?
There is implicit bias that exists in the world, and people, it doesn't mean that, like, there's a finger pointing. It's a learning experience so that you understand what's there and what's not.
Let's not be tone deaf here. The police are under a lot of pressure right now, nationally and locally. They have become the whipping boy for the media. Some of that's appropriate, some of it's not. And if it doesn't pertain to this community's police force, which in my somewhat limited experience has been positive, as you said, and professional across the board, then let's be careful how we say things. Because right now, they're under the gun.
So my perspective, or my view on this is not presuming anything about our current police force. Apparently I don't know them personally, so I would assume they're well respected. But who's to say in 50 years, a couple of bad eggs come along? And I mean, I'm sure there's already things in line to make sure that any sort of inappropriate handling of their jobs is handled by other authorities. But there's nothing wrong with just putting it in there. And they might already have this training, like we were saying, so that would just be a check on our list of our sustainability plan.
But so what if
That
you're,
we're already doing this.
I'm sorry, Taylor.
That's fine.
What if your wording was not provide training, but ensure proper training of the police force? So that the police force is providing the training that needs. So is it commensurate with what is consistent across the board for police, you know, or with what Tarpon Springs need? But for us, our local action as in a sustainability action plan is, we didn't ignore that, but we're ensuring that there is something in place. And then you can check that box and say, we are ensuring that the police are being provided training that is consistent with what our community needs, however that's worded. So maybe it's just, obviously, we're not providing that training, or we're not telling them what the training should be. I think we're ensuring that it is happening. I mean, if you know, there are checks and balances, right? And so, you know, how many people get their yearly review through HR, right? You go back and you look and you're like, wow, it's been 3 years since you had a yearly review, right? So it's just checks and balances. Ensure that this training is occurring. And I think that, I don't know if that eases some of that, provide this training for them, but ensure that this kind of training is happening so that we don't end up with having to figure out how to report complaints, and et cetera, you know, if this training is happening.
I think that's preferable. I don't like the term implicit bias, I'll be very honest. I don't have as much problem with the other wording in there, but that just strikes me as presumptuous, I guess is the word.
So I guess so is it, which issue, is it action 6 or action 7 that you have an issue with?
Both.
Okay, so let's just take a vote. Action 6, provide training for police officers focused on implicit bias, cultural responsiveness, and non-discrimination.
Maybe slightly changing, like, to ensuring, but yes, as a whole, yes. I agree with 6.
So you're making a different motion?
We're not really doing a motion, are we?
You need to.
Well, for this,
It
we,
needs to
yeah,
be a
if you want to
motion.
change it, then we do need to agree to change it.
I'll just agree to 6 then. I'm okay with it.
You're okay with 6?
I'm okay with it.
I'm okay with 6.
In its current wording, I have to vote against it. I think it could be improved. I think it should be improved.
Not as it's currently written, no.
Okay, so that's 3. So let's just go ahead and change it then, to ensure training.
For police officers focused on cultural responsibility or cultural responsiveness and non-discrimination, just leave out implicit bias.
I'm not okay with that,
Why?
because we all have implicit bias, and there's nothing wrong with educating people about that. It's not pointing finger and saying that they have an implicit bias, it's saying this is what implicit bias is, and making people aware of it, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with that.
I think it's confrontational.
I don't agree that that's confrontational. I think it's recognizing that it always exists. But we're not going to be dictated by our implicit bias. We're going to be aware of it and educated about it. And that's what it says to me.
Until we hear from the chief of police, I don't think that that's good enough. If he finds it offensive, then it shouldn't be in there. If he thinks, as you do, Dory, then I'm wrong and it should be included.
So I'm hearing what Paul's saying, and I'm thinking about, one of the things is, in this committee, we've never had a discussion in this way about anything other than this issue about police. And I think that it is a very sensitive issue, and we know in our country as a whole, it's very divisive issue. But one of the things that it's become is we've seen across the country that there are police who have implicit bias and have acted inappropriately, even to the point of killing people. Now, one of the things why things have not been in check for a long time is people are reluctant to address the police in a strong manner and to say, you know, it's time to address these issues, and we're going to hold people accountable who cross a line. Now, for the most part, I think police go into, I taught police in college to become police, and some of them were the most remarkable students, and some of them weren't. But I think that it's our responsibility as a community to make sure that, as much as possible, there aren't these transgressions that can happen. And as Dory points out, people get diversity training all the time. They get training in implicit bias. It doesn't say just because you're getting that training that you're guilty of those things. It's saying, you know, here's some training, let's refresh these things, let's go over them, let's make sure we're all on the same page, and we come out in having conversations about them, which always makes us better off, just like this conversation is. So I don't hear these things as accusations. I hear them as, these are the things the community wants to make sure doesn't happen, and let's make sure they don't. And even if you're 100% in a great police community here, there's no harm in doing this and doing refresher courses and making sure you have the best and latest training in these areas. That's all this says. It doesn't say you're horrible and biased. It's just saying, let's enhance us. Let's make us as good as we can be.
As someone who has confronted a police officer in my last trauma center who was verbally abusing a teenage boy, and I asked him what was the problem, and he said, there's no problem. And I said, you will not treat my patient that way, or you will leave. Never had a lick of trouble with him after that. I've also been confronted by 2 detectives who insisted that I had to do a alcohol level on a lawyer who was arrested and brought in, presumably under the influence, and they said, you have to do this test. I said, no, I don't. And they said, well, we're telling you to do it. I said, no, this is not a police department. You're in my hospital. I'm in charge. You are not. And it is up to the patient whether the test gets run, tested, and get done. There are people in the police who take that role when other police act in an inappropriate manner. And I think we have to respect that there is a chain of command in the police force in Tarpon Springs. And we have to approach this in a way that would not insult people before we get them on board. I find the term implicit bias insulting. And I don't think it adds anything to Action 6. I think it's tone deaf, at this point in time particularly.
Well, at this point, 3 of 5 have voted to keep it in, so I want to keep it in and keep moving, because we're at almost 7:30 and we're still on item number 2. And I think we're going to get feedback from Chief Young that will add to this conversation that we can go back and revisit. And then item number 7, let's just go through again. Taylor, are you in favor of keeping action item 7 in?
Yes.
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 No.
No.
Okay, so we're going to keep 7 in as well. Next item is, and then we added item 4, and I got note of that. So environmental justice, EE3. Action item 5 is incorporate environmental justice criteria and priorities into zoning, land use, permitting policies, and development of new projects. And that got 6 votes, so that's in. And then items 1, 2, and 9 got 4 votes. So action item 1 is conduct a comprehensive environmental justice assessment. Action item 2 is adopt an environmental justice or social equity plan that includes strategies to reduce negative impacts and burdens to low-income populations and persons of color. And action item 9 is implement projects to reduce exposure to contaminants and risks associated with environmental justice conditions. Anybody have any questions or concerns about those 4? All right, going on to equitable services and access. There are 5 of them that got 4 votes. So local action 2 is adopt an equity plan that evaluates current conditions in the community and establishes targets to improve equitable access and proximity. Action item 3 is adopt an equity or social justice policy that establishes a clear commitment to equity in local government decision-making activities and investments. Local action 5 is establish partnerships that engage key community groups and stakeholders in activities to advance equitable access and proximity to facilities, services, and infrastructure. 6 is publicize efforts to improve equitable access and proximity to priority foundational community assets and opportunities to contribute to decision-making and planning. And then 8 is provide advanced equity, inclusion, or cultural disparity training for local government staff. Any questions or comments about those?
Yeah, I don't understand why you adopt, well, I don't understand how you adopt a plan in action number 2. And I don't understand how you adopt an equity policy in action number 3 without first conducting a comprehensive equity assessment for the community, which is action number 1.
Does somebody want to speak up who voted for that?
I voted for action 1 for the same reason. Number 1 was on there because I did vote for numbers 2. Yeah, I voted for number 2 as well, and in voting for number 2, thought you can't really come up with a plan without knowing what your assessment is, assessing what your needs are.
We may find that our equity assessment shows us that there are other minority groups in this community in addition to African Americans, immigrants, Latinos, et cetera, that we simply have not addressed. I don't know how we adopt a plan or a policy without first getting a comprehensive assessment.
It would make sense.
To add it.
So do we want to, what I'm hearing is we want to add in action 1? Okay. All right. Moving on to Human Services, EE5. Action item 2, got 6 votes. Adopt a human services plan designed to guarantee basic human needs are met in the community. Action item 4, establish and support programming and events that inform residents of available human services and connect vulnerable community members to available programs and services. That got 5 votes. And action item 1, conduct a community needs assessment to identify priority services, needs, and resources, including the needs of vulnerable populations, was selected. Any comments or discussion about those 3 items? All right, and the last is poverty prevention and alleviation. Action item 3, develop public education campaigns to inform residents about how to enroll in available service programs to help meet basic needs. Got 5 votes. And then items 1, 7, and 8 got 4. So action item 1 is adopt a community-wide plan to reduce poverty. Action item 7 is provide child development programs for children living at or near the poverty line. And 8 is provide financial literacy, money management, banking options, or services for low-income residents. Any discussions or comments about those 3?
No,
4.
that should be available for all residents, not just low-income residents. Financial literacy, money management should, I think that should be a service for all our residents.
I agree.
Okay.
Makes sense.
I'm sorry, which one are we talking?
So
about?
it's action 8, provide financial literacy. Karen's suggesting that we switch it up to all residents.
That sounds good.
I know it's a poverty prevention, but that is a poverty, it's poverty prevention is providing that service to. all
Okay, so
people.
I think we're consensus then in modifying that statement to for all residents. Okay. All right, and that's what we've got for equity empowerment results. So moving on to discussion on community member area of interest. So I'd like to keep this short to like 10 minutes so that we can finish with the
Should be a motto.
I wanted to say there was
Discussion?
some good news story that we've only got one more
Category.
goal area.
right, arts, education, and
EAC, I think it's called.
culture,
Yeah,
civics, something along that culture, I think.
I'll tell you in a second. Education, arts, and community.
All right, we'll be wrapped up, and then we get to go out and hear what other people think are priorities
Yeah.
in the community, which I'm very
Excited to do.
excited to hear. All right, so Taylor, are there any specific, like sub areas of interest that you have?
You're asking, so I had I was gonna look into protecting the plants more. Are you asking what I've done with it, or there is another sub one that I met with the West Closterman Preserve group, the people who are kind of trying to raise money to buy the land and set it up as a preserve, and we took a tour of the property. Apparently they've done like an environmental assessment, like a survey. I haven't seen that yet, but I was trying to get them to send it to me. I need to reach out again. And but there are a few endangered plants, and I guess it's a critically imperiled ecosystem, like a type of ecosystem. I think it's like it's part of it's scrubby. There's also some like woody areas, but yeah, I'm trying to see the entire report that they had put together.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's one natural system. They're trying to preserve it.
So I met with people from the Pinellas County Community Foundation who have engaged with the Closterman. So one of the issues that comes up, and this maybe you can address and think about, is that with the Dunedin land, they were using that as, training and education and this. They were going to have activities there. The Closterman land is just land. And so this is an issue people are bringing up, that, there's no engagement with the land. And what I argued was it was important to just have wild land, and that everything doesn't have to be used. It has a lot of benefits. So in working with that, I think that's the argument that really needs to be stressed, how important it is to just
some
have the
land that-
wild land. It doesn't have to be developed in any way.
So
And
let me
that's
just
what I
stop right
heard.
here, though, because I appreciate
Yeah.
everything that you're saying, but what I'm looking for in the next 10 minutes is just, we had talked about creating like subcommittees, like you were working with the folks with Arcadis, right? And
Right.
so
Okay.
that's what I do not want to like a conversation right now. I
Okay,
really just
got it.
need like, this is what I really want to raise my hand to work on, so that we don't have a conflict of sunshine law. That's all that we're doing with this exercise right now. Is there something that you are working on sidebar that everybody else should know about to stay away from?
Reducing waste and the whole waste stream. Specifically trying to encourage businesses to participate in recycling.
Thank you. I am working on electric transportation. And I will- Yes, and I will continue engaging the city with that and others, so. Paul?
Two things, air pollution and flooding along the shores of our bayous.
Thank you. Karen, anything?
Yeah, so I would like to look into, I know a walkability study was done before, but walkability throughout and contiguous access, like from the downtown to our beaches.
What about the beaches? I'm sorry?
Contiguous access on sidewalks, like.
Contiguous access.
Yeah, transportation. I know that some of that has to do with that whole Beckett Bridge project that's coming up, and they're kind of looking at that, but I don't know enough about what is city sidewalk responsibility, what is county sidewalk responsibility, but right now you cannot get from downtown Tarpon to the beaches without crossing the street multiple times, and so I'd like to see the sidewalks safer for our community to get around.
In front of the yacht club, need to struggle.
Well, it's very difficult.
Horrible.
across.
Okay, Carol?
I'm working with NPAIR, North Pinellas.
Can you, is it
Advocacy for
EMPARE?
racial- NPARE, racial equity, and I'm the Tarpon person on the steering committee. And so I'm working to bring that advocacy group strongly in Tarpon and gathering information about black businesses. That's one of the things we're doing. So that's my focus.
Thank you.
What were the letters again? What do
NPARE.
and what does that stand for?
North Pinellas
Okay.
Advocacy.
Oh, I heard M. It's N as in Nancy.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
North Pinellas. Advocacy for racial equity.
Okay,
It involves Dunedin and, all of North County.
okay.
Thank you. All right, thank you, guys. See, we did it. Okay, moving on. So I wanted to talk, to get a timeline of community input. So Paul, if you could kind of catch us up to speed on, with the new hire, like the timeline of how that's going to go, and then how they're going to fold into this, and a timeline of like how, like, are we able to work with the right now they're doing the strategic planning for the city and the comp plan updates, so we had asked if we could like work with them to try to get community input, to have those community input sessions, or catch us up to speed.
Sure. As far as, I think your first question was hiring the sustainability coordinator position, right? Is that what I understood? So I've already got the job posting drafted, and the job description, as you know, has already been prepared. And I'm working on some interview materials so that we'll be ready to go. So we can, we've been given permission to post that October 1. So I'm working ahead of that so we can hit the ground running. I would imagine, I'm pretty optimistic about response. I think that's one of the few positions I would say that about right now. But I think that there's a strong interest in that type of work. And so, I'm optimistic we're going to get some applicants. I'm working on a review panel, and I'll tell you candidly, I'm going to recommend to the city manager we include planning and zoning member there, because they're such a strong partner of ours in this area that we'll want to do that. But also members of my department, and then anyone else the city manager thinks would be a good
Can
fit.
Dory be on it?
I don't know that that's appropriate.
Yeah,
It's
that would
not?
be, that
Oh,
would
okay.
be unusual, or, yeah. But so that's gonna happen in the next 2 or 3 months. I would imagine we could, if things go really well, by the beginning of the year, possibly have
Wow.
somebody selected. As
That's
far, yeah, as far as the strategic planning process, I know there's already been some initial outreach. The city has contracted with St. Pete College, who's also working with USF, I believe, on parts. I don't know all the details of that. But the good news is they're working to organize this and are doing a lot of the heavy lifting to make sure we stay on timelines and that the input is broad, including opportunities for this committee to weigh in. So what I'll be doing is getting back to you all with updated information on when the next opportunities are gonna be. I think, there's a whole outline of the steps, and I think it'll be coming up in the next few months, would be an opportunity for us to be providing input along with the rest of the community.
So my understanding was that the person, I think from St. Pete College, went to the Public Art Committee in their last meeting and interacted and talked. That's what Robert, my husband, said, who's on it. So he sort of thought they'd be here, too.
Well, I'll find out about that. So that's a thumbnail of the next, I'd say, 3 or 4 months of activities. Hand it back to you, Dory.
So I guess then do we need to be working on a plan of community outreach then?
Well, I think at a minimum, we need to make sure that the people working on the citywide have all the information from us, as far as what our plans are, what our interests are, so that it can be incorporated. In fact, just recently, the Planning and Zoning Department was reaching out to the other departments to find out any master plans that we already have, so that that can be considered. So what I think, I'll do is make sure they have our outline, and they're familiar with our STAR framework and the outcomes and local actions that we've prioritized so far, so that they have what we think and can advise on how perhaps our work can be incorporated into their outreach. And whether or not that's the way that we should do it, or should we continue with our own individual efforts and perhaps utilize some of the same methods that they do. So, it's something not for me to decide, but I can at least make sure they have the information of what we're working on and what we want to do, and I can report back to you all on what they suggest.
And to clarify, that is the process for the strategic plan or the comp plan, or they're doing it together?
I know they're working on both. Whether it's together or not, I'd need to find out. I'm not working on that project on a daily basis, so I really can't tell you the answer to that.
So when you're talking about the St. Pete College folks,
Yes.
they're working on which one?
Strategic plan, right?
I think that's the first priority, is a strategic plan.
They're working on the strategic plan.
Weren't you in that first meeting? Weren't you in that?
Yeah,
Yeah, those people.
but there's two processes. I'm trying to get straight in my head, like who's doing which one.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll get back to you all with an email on the answers to these questions, because I'm not gonna guess at it right here.
Sure, okay,
But
but
I
I,
do
like,
think
because our
Dory-
next meeting is October, and that's the final STAR framework, like the final focus area. So in November, what are we gonna do? Like, we need, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would like to start with the community engagement ASAP so that we can keep this process rolling, or start with the staff engagement. Because I think we need to have both, right? We want to have staff weigh in on all of this
Absolutely,
in
yeah.
addition to the community.
So I
I
think
do think, Dory,
First.
that.
Well, hang on,
if-
Paul, or Taylor had his hand raised.
she can go ahead, but I got one thing after you.
I was just saying, if the strategic plan people are visiting the committees, and if they were to come here, I think that that would be a good discussion, but we would have to figure out what we want to say to them. Because then that would also be a good time to discuss with them about the community engagement and how to work it out with them, maybe, to do it together. Because they're the people who are facilitating it. And why they went to the Public Art Committee, my understanding was they were going to visit all of the committees.
So they weren't getting feedback for the strategic plan from the committee?
Yeah, they were. They
Well,
went
then-
there to ask them what they thought.
Right, but that's not going to help us with our plan.
No, it's not, but since they're doing the strategic plan, we want to be able to influence that, don't we?
But that's not what I'm talking about right now.
Oh.
What I'm
sorry,
talking
then
about
I
is-
misunderstood.
Okay, let me take it back then. We need a vehicle to communicate with the community, the STAR framework, and get community input on the STAR framework.
Okay.
So-
That's what I'm wanting to have a conversation about, like, how does this committee want to proceed with engaging with the community to get feedback? But part of it is, like, we can't assume that the strategic planning process, it's not part of the scope of work that they were hired to do, to just tack on our thing to facilitate some meetings about the STAR framework. So you understand what I'm saying? So,
So I feel like a first step would be posting all of our results and the STAR framework on our website. If we can post the STAR framework, I don't know. Are we able to? But on our sustainability website, that way we could at least reference people like, hey, check it out. This is what we're doing. It'd be easy for them to do it in their own time, see what we think, see what they think.
I
But
think
just
we're
having our
going to need to
results.
have a preliminary meeting of this committee to bring all of the wording of the work that we've agreed on down to digestible pieces.
You might
You
be
know,
right.
there may
yeah.
be individual questions from each section for members of the community, but if we throw all of that at that, I don't think we'll get any
I
other
mean, it's a
response
lot.
other than
It's
a question
clunky.
mark.
It's clunky for sure. Like, there's a lot to
Well, it's
look at.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we've dropped a lot. I mean, clearly, we've dropped a lot out in the reorganization that we've been going through. We've been prioritizing what we think are the high points for this community specifically. I would really like to see at least a written version of everything in the order that we've set. Isn't that what we've done?
The word changes and
That's,
everything.
yeah, the word changes and the outcome that we're targeting. I mean, we've really gone kind of off the map from star rating. We've created kind of our own priorities, but we use that as a guide. But I don't see, we're not trying to achieve points. We're not trying to demonstrate that we're doing this in order to get rated. All we're doing is that we followed it so that we could actually see everything that people are talking about in terms of sustainability. And then we prioritize, but we haven't seen a written version yet of our wording and our priorities. I would love to see that
Yeah.
before we engage with anyone, just to really nail it down and discuss, you know, what this committee has chosen as the high points, the priorities.
so I've been keeping track of it all in a spreadsheet, and I've been sending it like updates, and Ashley's been incorporating it, and so we have that.
Okay,
But after next month, after we hear from, like, we're gonna hear back about equity and empowerment next month, So it'll probably not be until December if we have any feedback from arts and education and culture, community, right? To be able to put that all together. But my thought is almost maybe a side by side of like, this is the whole STAR framework. This is what we've prioritized, because other members of the community may not think that what we have prioritized is a priority. And that we may have like left something out that they're like, no, this is really important to us. And I think that
That's a
if,
good idea.
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, I think that we can't just presume that because we've made our decisions that this is what we're going with.
I hope that there's that much interest that people would want to read. You know, what always stumped me was that there were so many points where it said create a committee or create a group, and I'm thinking of who? Of who's gonna do it?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like there's a handful of people that are willing to be involved. And so hopefully there'll be people that are excited enough about sustainability that they will read it and look at it side by side, but I think that's really wishful. I
Well-
mean, I hope that it happens, but so far, I don't see that there's a lot of volunteerism and a lot of commitment. I mean, I really enjoyed, Paul and I, long time ago, there was a presentation over at the Unitarian Universalist Church, and there was a great turnout to that. I mean, if we saw that with a presentation on this, that would be outstanding. I mean, I hope that those people come out. But so far, it doesn't, you know, I'm not sure.
We're not going to have enough time to finish this conversation tonight, so I think we carry it over to next month. But I think that we need to keep talking amongst ourselves about like how we want to proceed with this, because no one's going to read every single aspect of the STAR plan. No citizen is going to do that. So maybe we have
That's why I
8
thought-
different sessions or 4 different sessions, and you choose which one you really want to go to. Maybe is an option. I don't know, we need to brainstorm ideas like this to try to figure out, and we also need a strong facilitator who's gonna help
Absolutely.
document, pull, like, you know what I mean, like, show citizens, explain it, make all of that make sense during the meeting, so we're not just sitting there, what do you think? I don't know. You know what I mean? But I've gone to like a Forward Pinellas meeting where you get 3 stickers, and you get to pick like your 3 top choice. So something like that, maybe, you know, but we need someone to facilitate that.
It just needs to be presented in a way that's easy to get into. And the way it is now just isn't.
Right.
And we need a good summary and maybe a slideshow. And maybe we do need to do it not here, but go to the Universalist Church and go to other venues where people, the community is, rather than ask them to come to us. And because nobody tunes into this, right? We haven't had any. So there's not like a lot of people rushing to work on this.
The Universalist Church might be a good place to start.
Yeah,
There are people there who,
Who are
like Tom
interested.
Aarons, who created a luncheon group discussing new scientific advances.
mhm,
And those kind of people are there.
right. And we can just present our views, you know, what our priorities were, and then ask, are there things you think that we've left out?
I was going to suggest that. I mean, we've talked about this before. I think Dr. Robinson mentioned the risk of just saying, what do you think? Could be a wide open thing, and it might not get you too much. But here's what we've been working on, and this is why we feel like this is important. What do you think about this? Is there anything else that you would add?
Yeah.
And, you know, that's one approach, but not the only approach.
What
Something-
about a workshop with breakout groups? Where, like you said, like, so something may not be of importance to me, but I can go to that little section and get a little more information and give my feedback. So it's all happening at the same time, potentially, right? But with different breakout groups, and you could do that maybe on 3 different occasions in 3 different parts of the community to try to engage all different people.
Yeah. And then one of us can be in each breakout group. Well, there aren't enough of us, but we could, so that we could at least speak to some of the things.
I was like, something. So I think let's stop with this conversation now, but be brainstorming over the month of like, you know, times that you participated in these kind of things, like what worked, what didn't work, so that we could start to compile a list of like how we kind of envision this going. And then I think that we had heard at one point from the city manager that to get city staff engaged as well, that perhaps it could be like a roundtable kind of meeting where they all come at the same time, right? Like during the day, so that it's not like, am I right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
Or, because I do think it's important to get feedback from staff, not just,
Absolutely.
you know, in addition, not just us and also the community.
I mean, there's a lot happening simultaneously because we're going to have a new sustainability coordinator. We have to figure out how we work with that person as well, from an advisory committee standpoint.
And I'm thinking they would be organizing some of this.
Yeah.
Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully. Because it's not going to be, you know, we're not going to be, we may be coming at the same time in January, us ready to
Yeah.
start, like,
Well, could that person be the facilitator?
I don't
I
know.
mean, that's sort of
I don't know.
what their job is.
If they're good at facilitating, it's really hard to have
Yeah,
those, it's
yeah,
really
yeah.
hard to run those meetings. All right. So items for next agenda. We will go back and hear from equity and empowerment feedback, staff feedback from Chief Young, hopefully. And then have the final focus area,
EAC.
education, arts, and community? Community,
Look it up again, but,
Isn't it right here?
yeah, community.
great.
Yep.
And then continue the conversation about how we gather community input.
Yeah.
That's gonna
And
be
I
a
think that
lot.
that's,
Yeah.
I think that's good. Anybody have any additions to that? Nope. All right, then moving on to public comments, which there are none. Staff comments?
I do have a quick report, but you'd have to extend the meeting, or I could just wait till next time.
Motion to extend the meeting?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I think Dr. Robinson would want to hear this. Of course, he knows a lot about it, but I wanted to report back to you all on an item you heard and gave your opinion on, and that's the Whitcomb Bayou item. And Dr. Robinson, if you've got something different, please let me know. But the summary of what the board voted for was the option that the committee was in favor of, the one grant approach. And that was approved to move forward, and I spoke with Project Administration Director Bob Robertson this afternoon, and he confirmed that they're moving forward to work through our engineer to hire to hire Arcadis to prepare this technical feasibility and alternatives analysis. And what this is a planning phase. It'll present 3 alternatives for public input on different ways that you could treat that shoreline to address the flooding. And then the goal would be to narrow that down to a single project, ultimately to move forward with a grant application and go through that whole process, ultimately to go right into construction.
Right.
So that was approved to move forward, and it is moving forward, and that's what I got for comments.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's great. Great news. Yeah, celebrate. We didn't really celebrate about the hiring either, so celebrate. Yay. All right.
This is a powerful committee when you think about all these things that have gone
That's what I've been
through.
saying.
Ashley, do you have any?
No.
Anything? Okay. Any committee comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lucianne and I just finished a trip of almost 4,000 miles in a Tesla Y. We went to New England, drove around all over the place, and we had some range anxiety when we started, not knowing if we would run out of electrons before we got to our next supercharger. But the car, the Y is, quote, an SUV. We carried a 5-month-old puppy in a crate behind our heads and all of our luggage. And by the way, there's a front trunk that held 2 small suitcases because the engine's underneath you, which is, well, it's on the wheels and the battery's underneath you. It was easy. It was easy. The car tells you where the next logical charging, in our case, it was mostly superchargers, are, how much energy you're gonna have left in your tank, in your battery when you get there, how long it's gonna take you to charge up. And it was, and we got to our motel the 3rd day. We decided to not act like we're still 20 years old, and not try to do it in 2 days like we used to, which is rough, but to just stretch it out, because, it takes 35 minutes to charge up. It's not like putting in gasoline, takes longer. But the places that you stop, where the superchargers are, tend to be cleaner than the gas stations where we used to stop, and they're more pleasant. And charging's really easy. There's time to walk the dog, time to get a cup of coffee or tea or whatever. And we were worried that if we got in construction or we got into, a blocus, which is French for blockade, which we did on the 2nd day, on Saturday, that we would run out of electrons while we were sitting in traffic. Well, the interesting thing about electric vehicles apparently is that if you inch forward and let the car stop you, it charges the battery. There's regenerative braking, so we never dropped more than a percentage point. And it was smooth. I can't say enough good things about that particular electric vehicle.
4,000 miles is quite a test.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
we were a lot calmer on the way back than we were on the way up. But I'd like to communicate that to other people in the community in some manner. You may be able to suggest something. But the vehicle is a conversation starter. People want to know, how far can you go? How long does it take to charge up? What are they like? I said, well, it's the fastest vehicle I've ever driven, and I've raced Porsches. And they'd say, what? And I said, no, it's true. These things are silly fast. But they're very comfortable. And because the battery sits low in the car and it's so big, they have good handling as well. So the vehicles really sell themselves. We wouldn't have it except for you and Jeff letting us drive that 3, which kind of turned our heads around. But
Well, I think you should write that up, and we can put it on the sustainability page like I did with the water heater,
Great idea.
the
okay,
hybrid water heater.
okay, will do.
Okay, that's a great story. I like that. Just to go full circle, I did send an email to the commissioners about the ICCT report and made sure that they were all aware that the policy recommendations and everything that went with it. So
The what report?
the ICCT report, the International Climate
Oh,
Report. Yeah.
I'm
Paul.
sorry, I got one more item.
Okay, go ahead.
And it's credit to Ashley as well, but the city manager approved us participating with cities of Oldsmar and, what's the other city we're working with for the Drive Electric?
Dunedin.
Dunedin, Safety
Yes.
Harbor.
So several cities, the event's gonna be hosted in Oldsmar, and Ashley's been representing us to be part of that, so we're gonna participate. And, do you have a date of when that is?
and what is this for?
It's to promote just what Dr. Robinson was talking about.
It's
getting-
National Drive Electric Week is next. It starts September 25th and goes through October 3rd. But I was already committed to a couple of events, and September in Florida is not the awesomest time for events. It's still pretty hot. So it's going to be in November. I think it was November 11th, Ashley?
Yeah,
Trying to
I'm
find it right now, I'm sorry.
catching her by surprise on this, but I know she's working with the other cities, and we're gonna contribute both in terms of a small donation to the event as the city, but also giving some of our staff time to support the event. And really try to help awareness of these drive electric events really do change minds.
Especially like Dunedin has the superchargers, so that's really good.
So the idea, I think, is my understanding, is that we will bring the 13th Saturday, is what I have on the calendar. We'll bring the Tesla for drives, and then the other people, citizens can bring their cars, because then it's like you're telling your story, so that people can ask questions of people that drive electric vehicles as well, so. And the city can maybe bring the wrapped leaf
Yes.
as a demonstration vehicle. So, cool. All right, well then, if we don't have anything else, we only went 7 minutes, that wasn't bad. Go ahead and adjourn this meeting, 8:07, thank you.